The diner was packed that night, every booth filled with people escaping the long day, the air heavy with the smell of greasy fries and burnt coffee. Daniel sat with his daughter Lily, his back straight though his shoulders carried the weight of exhaustion, a tiredness only a single parent could understand. His eyes softened every time he looked at his 9-year-old, who was bent over her math homework, her tongue poking from the corner of her mouth as she concentrated. Daniel leaned forward, helping her work out the fractions she struggled with, his voice calm and patient, the kind of patience that comes only when love outweighs weariness. For him, moments like these were treasures. After losing his wife 3 years earlier, he had poured every ounce of himself into raising Lily. Nights like this, simple, ordinary, filled with pancakes and homework, were the things that kept him going. He wasn't a man who asked for much anymore. He just wanted to keep his little girl safe, fed, and loved. He had no idea that before this night was over, that simple desire would push him into the spotlight he had spent years trying to avoid. It started with the young woman. She came in quietly, carrying a worn backpack, her eyes tired and weary like someone who had been walking too long, searching for someplace safe. She hovered at the entrance for a moment, scanning for an open seat, until 3 men in expensive suits waved her over with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. She hesitated, then perhaps out of politeness or hunger, she approached their table and sat down. At first, it looked harmless, but within minutes the men's tone shifted. Their words grew sharper, their laughter louder and uglier. One of them leaned in, his voice low and mocking as he told her she had chosen the wrong table. His friend chuckled darkly and added that maybe she could make herself useful since she was already there. The woman's hand shook as she tried to rise, but a rough grip on her wrist forced her back into the seat. Around the diner, people noticed but no one moved. Some averted their eyes, others simply lowered their heads into their plates. No one wanted to get involved. No one except Daniel. He glanced at Lily, then back at the scene unfolding across the room. His jaw tightened, his chest heavy with the old instinct he had tried to bury. He placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, steady and reassuring, and whispered for her to stay put. "Daddy will be right back," he said, his voice low. She looked up at him with wide, worried eyes and nodded, trusting him as she always did. Daniel rose from the booth, his movements quiet but filled with purpose, and walked across the diner until he was standing at their table. His presence was calm but carried an invisible weight that silenced the laughter of the men for a brief second. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice level, "she may have chosen the wrong table, but it looks like you've chosen the wrong day." The men blinked, then broke into mocking laughter, one of them sneering as he asked who Daniel thought he was. Daniel didn't flinch. He looked them dead in the eye and said, "I'm the guy who isn't going to let you hurt her." The men stood, trying to use their height and expensive suits as intimidation, but Daniel's calmness rattled them more than they expected. He reached out, pulled the young woman gently behind him, and told them the conversation was over. One of the men shoved him, another cursed, but before the shove had even registered, Daniel's reflexes took over. In a blur, he had one of them on the ground gasping for breath, another held tightly by the wrist in a grip that made him yelp and release his hold. The third stepped back, startled by the suddenness and precision of Daniel's movements. The diner fell into stunned silence, every fork, every cup frozen in midair. The young woman clutched her backpack, tears streaking down her cheeks as she stammered her thanks. Daniel simply gave her a gentle nod and told her she was safe now. But while the incident might have seemed over, something bigger had just been set in motion. People began whispering around the diner. A waitress leaned toward a customer, murmuring, "Do you know who that is?" The man squinted, then his eyes widened with recognition. "That's Captain Daniel Hayes," he whispered back, "Special Forces. He disappeared after his wife died." "That's him." Word spread like fire, and soon the stranger was no longer just a stranger. The young woman looked at him with astonishment, realizing that the man who had stepped in to defend her wasn't just an ordinary single dad but someone with a history written in shadows and sacrifice. Daniel tried to brush it off, insisting it was long ago and no longer mattered, but the truth was out. He hadn't wanted anyone to know. He hadn't wanted his daughter to live under the weight of his past. But fate doesn't always ask permission, it simply unfolds. The men Daniel had confronted weren't ordinary either. Humiliated, they vowed revenge. They had power, influence, and dangerous connections, and soon Daniel began to notice shadows where none should be. Cars that seemed to linger too long near his apartment, strangers watching him outside Lily's school, threats whispered just loud enough to be heard. It became a test of everything he had tried to leave behind, a battle between his desire for a quiet life and his responsibility to protect not only his daughter but now also the young woman he had saved. Her name was Emily, and she wasn't just some lost girl at a diner. She was a journalist, one who had been digging into corruption connected to those very men. By saving her, Daniel had stumbled into a much bigger fight than he had anticipated. Balancing fatherhood with this new danger was almost unbearable. There were nights he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had doomed himself and Lily by stepping in that night. But then he would hear her soft breathing from the other room, the innocence of a child who still believed the world could be kind, and he knew he couldn't regret it. He couldn't back down, because to back down would mean teaching Lily that silence in the face of wrong was acceptable. He had already lost too much in his life, he wouldn't lose his integrity too. Together, Daniel and Emily began working to expose the truth. It wasn't easy, there were close calls, threats that felt too close to home, and moments Daniel nearly gave into fear. But Emily's courage fueled his, and Lily's trust reminded him of why he fought. Slowly, piece by piece, they gathered evidence, and eventually justice caught up to the men who thought themselves untouchable. They were stripped of their power, exposed for their crimes, and forced to face the consequences of their arrogance. By the end, Daniel wasn't hailed as a hero in headlines or celebrated in the streets. That wasn't what mattered to him. What mattered was that Lily looked up at him with shining eyes and said, "Daddy, you're my hero." And Emily, with quiet gratitude, reminded him that kindness, even in its fiercest form, has the power to change lives. It had all started with the wrong table on the wrong day, but in truth, it had been exactly the right place, exactly the right time. Because sometimes life doesn't ask us if we're ready, it simply calls us to act, and in those moments, we reveal who we really are. And maybe that's the message here. Strength isn't about muscles or medals or titles. It's about standing up when others look away. It's about choosing to protect rather than ignore, to care rather than stay silent. Daniel didn't just defend a stranger that night. He defended the very idea that kindness, courage, and love are stronger than fear. So if this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have had the courage to do what Daniel did? What does kindness mean to you in moments of fear? We'd love to hear your stories. And don't forget to subscribe to Kindness Wins, where we bring you powerful, emotional stories that remind us of the strength of compassion and the beauty of choosing good. Hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and let's make kindness the loudest voice in the room, because in the end, kindness always wins.